Please, please, I'm just a kid. You can hear the tears, can't you? That raw, shaky terror that only a child's voice can truly hold. It's supposed to break your heart. It's designed to. That voice belongs to 13-year-old Lilith Vance. And in this sterile, wood-paneled courtroom, that voice is her final performance. The judge, a man named Justice Morrow with a face carved from granite and eyes that have seen every trick in the book, doesn't buy it. He leans forward, and his voice isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It's the sound of a vault door slamming shut. The court sees no remorse here, he says, each word a nail in a coffin. Only a script. And the curtain is falling. Now, let's rewind. Because every tragedy has a beginning, long before the final act. We all have this idea of childhood, don't we? It's a world of scraped knees, secret handshakes, and friendships forged in treehouses. We think the monsters are the ones hiding under the bed. It's a comforting lie. The most dangerous monster is the one who knows how to cry on command. This is a story about two best friends, Lilith and Chloe. One who lived entirely in the light, and one who decided to blow out the candle, just to see if she could get away with it. But before we go back to the beginning, to the salt spray and the whispering cliffs where it all started, I want you to pause for a second. Just listen to the silence around you. Where are you, right now, listening to my voice? Are you in your car, watching the streetlights blur past? Are you at home, with the rain tapping against your window like a secret code? Wherever you are, whatever your weather, you're here with me now, in the dark. If you're ready to step into the misty streets of Havens Point and uncover the truth, then do us both a favor and make sure you're subscribed. Because the performance is about to begin. To understand the end, we have to go back to the place where it all began. 3 months before that courtroom. A place called the SPIRE. Picture it with me. The town of Havens Point. It's one of those picture-perfect coastal towns where everything looks like it's been washed clean by the sea. The houses are all shingled in gray, the gardens are perfectly manicured, and the air always carries the smell of salt, of pine, and something else. A kind of quiet money. The kind of quiet that screams. But on the edge of this perfect town, nature gets wild. And that's where the SPIRE is. It's a jagged finger of rock and earth, jutting out over the churning, iron-gray ocean. The path to get there is muddy, hidden behind old pines that whisper secrets when the wind blows. The ground at the edge is soft, a mix of grass and crumbling soil, and it's dotted with these tough little purple wildflowers that cling on for dear life. One wrong step, and it's a 100-foot drop onto rocks that look like broken teeth. This was their place. Lilith and Chloe's fortress of solitude. Now, let's meet them. Not as a killer and a victim, but as they were. Two 13-year-old girls. Chloe. She was all sunshine, even under the permanent overcast sky of Havens Point. Her laughter wasn't something she held back. It burst out of her, a sound so genuine it could make you smile without knowing why. She was the kind of girl who had dirt on her jeans from helping her mom in the garden, whose hair was always a little messy from the wind. She trusted easily. She loved fiercely. She saw the SPIRE as a magical place, a secret to be shared. And then there was Lilith. If Chloe was the sun, Lilith was the moon. Cool, observant, reflecting light but generating very little of her own. She was just as beautiful, but in a way that made you pause, not smile. She was poised. Always. Her clothes were never messy. Her hands were always clean. She'd stand at the very edge of the SPIRE, not with reckless abandon like Chloe, but with a still, calculating calmness. She'd look down at the waves smashing against the rocks, and her face would be a blank page. Their friendship, from the outside, made perfect sense. The popular, vibrant girl and the quiet, artistic one. But if you listened closely, you could hear the imbalance. I want you to listen to a memory with me. It's a week before the fall. They're sitting at the edge of the SPIRE, sharing a bag of candy. My mom says this weather is going to last all week, Chloe says, tossing a piece of chocolate into her mouth. Boring. I wanted to go to the beach. Lilith doesn't look at her. She keeps her eyes on the horizon. The beach is for tourists. This is better. It's more pure. Pure. Chloe laughs, a warm, bubbling sound. You sound like one of those art books you're always reading. It's true, Lilith says, her voice calm and flat. This has drama. The beach is just pleasant. There's no art in being pleasant. There's a silence, filled only by the wind and the waves. It's not a comfortable one. Chloe, trying to bridge the gap, nudges her. Well, I like pleasant. And I like that you like this drama. It's our thing. Lilith finally turns her head. She gives Chloe a smile. It's a perfect, practiced curve of the lips. But it doesn't warm her eyes. They stay as cool and gray as the sea below. Yes, Lilith says, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. It's our thing. And in that moment, if you were watching, you'd see it. You'd see the hunger in Lilith's stillness. She didn't just want to be Chloe's friend. She wanted to own her. To possess that light, that warmth exclusively. She saw Chloe's simple, happy soul not as a gift, but as a flaw. A simplicity that needed to be corrected. The Spire was their sanctuary. But for one of them, it was always going to be a stage. And on that stage, a tragedy was already being written, line by cold, calculated line. To understand the monster, you have to see its habitat. You have to see the world it grew up in. For Lilith, that world was a gallery. Not a home. A gallery. Let's leave the wild, salty air of the Spire behind for a moment. Let me take you inside the Vance residence. First, the silence. It's the first thing you'd notice. It's not a peaceful silence. It's a heavy, absorbing silence, the kind that makes you afraid to scrape your chair or breathe too loud. The air smells of lemon-scented polish and, faintly, of turpentine. The floors are polished concrete, a cold, gray expanse. The walls aren't painted warm colors. They're white, serving as a backdrop for expensive, abstract paintings. Splashes of angry color in sleek black frames. There are no family photos. No messy piles of mail. No evidence that real, messy people actually live here. It's perfect. It's sterile. It's empty. Now, let's cross the street. Let's go into Chloe's house. The moment you step inside, it's an assault on the senses. A warm, wonderful assault. The air is thick with the smell of garlic and rosemary from a simmering pot of sauce. A dog barks happily from another room. A television is on, someone is laughing, and two other people are having a loud, overlapping conversation about their day. The floor is cluttered with shoes. The fridge is covered in A-graded spelling tests and clumsy, heartfelt drawings. It's chaotic. It's alive. It's everything Lilith's house is not. And Lilith, she drank this chaos in like a person dying of thirst. She'd sit at their chipped wooden kitchen table, and you could see her just watching. Cataloging. Chloe's mom would ruffle her hair as she passed, and Lilith would freeze for a second, not knowing how to process the casual affection. Chloe would argue with her brother over the last breadstick, a loud, dramatic, and utterly meaningless fight that would end in laughter. And Lilith would just watch, her head tilted, as if she were a scientist observing the bizarre rituals of a foreign tribe. One afternoon, about a month before the fall, they were in Chloe's cluttered bedroom. Chloe, bursting with excitement, showed Lilith a friendship bracelet. It was a simple, clumsily woven thing of green and blue threads. "Jessica made it for me in art class," Chloe said, beaming. "Isn't it cute?" Lilith took the bracelet. She didn't look at it with warmth. She held it between her thumb and forefinger, like a biologist holding a strange insect. "It's asymmetrical," she said, her voice flat. "The green is the wrong shade. It clashes." Chloe's smile didn't even falter. She was used to this. "Oh, who cares? She made it for me. That's the point." She took the bracelet back and tied it around her wrist, a simple, unthinking act of acceptance. And that was the moment. Right there. If you look closely, you can see the crack forming. Lilith's face didn't twist in rage. She didn't shout. That's not her style. Her expression just went still. Colder than usual. She looked at that cheap, ugly bracelet on her best friend's wrist, and she didn't see a token of friendship. She saw a betrayal. She saw her territory being invaded. Jessica. Jessica was ordinary, pleasant, and Lilith had already decided there was no art in being pleasant. Chloe's light, which Lilith thought was hers alone to bask in, was being shared, given away to someone unworthy, to someone ordinary. That was the fatal flaw. Not a hot jealousy, but a cold, possessive one. Her own home was an empty canvas, and she had decided Chloe was the only color worth having. She couldn't stand to see that color on anyone else's palette. The idea didn't come in a flash of rage. It dawned with the quiet certainty of a verdict. If she could not possess the light exclusively, then no one would. The single piano keynote fades out, leaving only the faint, ticking clock. The plan didn't need a weapon. The plan was the weapon. And every part of it was chosen with the cold, precise eye of an artist selecting a brush. It began with the weather. Lilith watched the forecast all week. She knew the exact hour the storm would roll in from the ocean. She needed the wind to muffle sounds. She needed the rain to wash away evidence. She needed the dark, angry clouds to provide the drama. For her, this was a production. And she was the director. The stage was set. The Spire, on a night like this, was a different creature. The wind whipped across the cliff edge, tearing at your clothes. The waves below weren't just churning. They were roaring, a furious white foam against the black rocks. It was terrifying. It was perfect. Now, imagine Chloe, pulling her hood tight against the wind, a flicker of nervous excitement in her eyes. Lil, this is crazy. My mom will kill me if she finds out we're out here. And Lilith, her face a mask of shared adventure. It's the best time to see it. It's so alive. She had lured Chloe here with a secret, a whispered promise of something important she needed to show her. A test of their friendship. And Chloe, because she trusted completely, came. They stood near the edge. The ground was already turning to mud under their feet. This is where you have to see the details Lilith had already calculated. The specific, soft patch of earth she knew was unstable. The exact rock she had placed her foot behind, to brace herself. The argument didn't start as a scream. It started as a conversation. I saw you with Jessica after school, Lilith said, her voice almost casual against the wind. You were laughing. Chloe, confused, shouted back over the gale. So, we were just talking. She's nice. Nice. Lilith's voice gained an edge, a practiced one. You give our secrets to everyone who's nice? This place? Our conversations? Is it all just currency to you? Lilith, what are you talking about? Chloe's confusion was turning to real hurt now. This was the reaction Lilith wanted. The emotional turmoil. It would make the rest more believable. You pretend this is special, Lilith hissed, stepping closer. But it's not. It's just pleasant. There's no art in it. Not for you. The hurt on Chloe's face was genuine. A part of Lilith, the artist, must have appreciated it. It was the perfect emotion for the scene. Lilith, stop it. You're being weird. I'm showing you what real art is, Lilith said, her voice dropping, becoming eerily calm. And then, the movement. It wasn't a wild, passionate shove. It was a short, brutal, and efficient push. 2 hands, placed squarely on Chloe's chest. A surgeon's move. Direct. Final. There was a moment, a fraction of a second, where time seemed to freeze. Chloe's eyes widened, not with understanding, but with a pure, animal shock. Her hands flailed, grasping at nothing but the rain-filled air. Her mouth opened, but whatever sound she made was stolen by the wind. And then she was gone. The fall was silent, swallowed whole by the storm. There was no scream. Just the relentless howl of the wind and the distant, crashing waves. Lilith didn't peer over the edge immediately. She stood there, catching her breath. She looked at her hands, not in horror, but as if checking for marks. Then, she carefully scuffed her shoes in the mud, creating the illusion of a frantic scramble. She tore the sleeve of her own jacket slightly on a nearby branch. She was staging the scene. When she was satisfied, she let the performance begin. She pulled out her phone. Her hands, which had been so steady during the push, were now trembling violently. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and then she dialed. The 911 call that followed was a masterpiece. Her voice was a high-pitched, hysterical sob, layered with hyperventilating gasps. "Hello. Help. Please, we were at the Spire, the cliffs, and she slipped. My friend, she fell. She just fell. I tried to grab her. Oh God, please, hurry." She gave the location, her voice cracking with what sounded like utter devastation. She stayed on the line, sobbing, until the distant wail of sirens cut through the storm. Then she hung up. The sobbing stopped. The trembling stopped. She stood in the lashing rain, alone on the cliff edge. The wind dried the fake tears on her cheeks. She looked out at the raging black ocean, and for the first time all night, a real emotion flickered across her face. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't fear. It was pride. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving Havens Point washed in a thin, gray light. The kind of light that feels like a sigh. And with that light came the news, spreading through the town like a cold chill. A terrible accident. A tragedy. Chloe was gone. This is when Detective Ben Carter enters our story. He's a man who carries the weather of his job on his shoulders. His eyes are a little tired, his movements a little slow, like he's pushing against a constant, invisible wind. He has a daughter about Lilith's age, and that changes how you see these things. It either makes you too soft, or it makes you look twice as hard. He met the Vance family in a sterile, beige interview room at the station. The parents were a portrait of quiet, shocked distress. And Lilith, she was the centerpiece. She was curled in a chair, wrapped in a gray police issue blanket that swallowed her whole. Her eyes were red raw. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. She was the very picture of shattered innocence. She told her story again, the one we already know. The wind, the slippery mud, the desperate, failed grab for her friend's hand. It was flawless. It was heartbreaking. Detective Carter nodded, his voice a low, gentle rumble. He offered her a tissue. He told her how brave she was for calling for help. But here's the thing about Detective Carter. He's a watcher. And while he was listening to her words, he was also watching her hands. They were clutched together in her lap, under the blanket. Clean. Perfectly clean. No dirt under the fingernails. No traces of the frantic, clawing struggle in the mud she had just described. It was a small thing. A tiny, almost invisible crack in the performance. But he saw it. A few days later, after the funeral, Lilith came to the station with her father. She wanted to return the blanket, she said. And she had something for the detective. She handed him a large, flat folder. Her hands were steady now. "I drew this," she said, her voice a fragile thread of sound. "For Chloe's parents. But I thought you should see it too. So you remember her." Inside was a charcoal drawing. And it was stunning. A portrait of Chloe, laughing, the wind in her hair, with the spire and the ocean spread out behind her. The detail was photographic. The love in it seemed profound. Detective Carter thanked her, his voice even. He praised her talent. But after she left, he sat at his desk and stared at the drawing. He stared for a long, long time. The coffee in his mug went cold. What was it? What was itching at the back of his mind? And then he saw it. It was the perspective. The angle. The artist, Lilith, had drawn Chloe from slightly below and to the side. It was the view of someone who was already standing over the edge. It was the view of the rocks. The view of the fall. It wasn't a drawing from memory of her friend standing safely on the cliff. It was a drawing from the imagination of her friend's final moments. A tribute, she'd called it. To Detective Carter, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like a souvenir. He leaned back in his chair, the old leather creaking under his weight. He looked out his window at the quiet, grieving town. The sobbing girl in the blanket was gone. In her place was the artist. And the artist had just signed her work. There are few places more brutal than a school hallway after a tragedy. It's an ecosystem of whispers and stares. And a week after Chloe's funeral, Lilith Vance walked back into it. Detective Carter was there too. Not in an official capacity. He was picking up some paperwork for his own daughter, who'd been out sick. But he stayed to watch. He told himself he was being thorough. Really, he was following a feeling. A cold stone sitting in his gut. The moment Lilith stepped through those double doors, a hush fell around her. Not a total silence, but a ripple of it. A wave of recognition. Kids parted to let her through. Teachers offered her soft, sad smiles. She was the center of a sad, terrible universe. And she played the part perfectly. She wore a simple black dress. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, as if carrying a great weight. Her eyes were downcast. When a popular boy, a basketball player named Mark, touched her arm and said, "I'm so sorry, Lilith," she looked up at him. Her eyes welled with fresh, shimmering tears. She placed her hand over his and left it there a second too long, a silent, poignant thank you. It was a beautiful, fleeting moment of connection. From his spot by the water fountain, Carter saw it differently. He saw the calculation. The way her eyes, just before they filled with tears, scanned his face to gauge his reaction. The way she timed the touch. It wasn't the raw, awkward grief of a teenager. It was a performance. She was curating her grief, the same way she curated her art. He watched her move through the day. In the cafeteria, she sat alone, pushing food around her tray. A group of girls approached, offering to sit with her. Lilith gave them a brave, trembling smile and shook her head. "I'm okay. Thank you." She wanted to be seen alone. She was painting a picture of the lonely, grieving friend. Later, near Chloe's old locker, which had become a makeshift shrine covered in notes and flowers, Carter saw it again. A teacher approached Lilith, putting a comforting hand on her back. Lilith's body went stiff for a fraction of a second, a reaction so fast you'd miss it if you blinked, before she melted into the comfort, turning to bury her face in the teacher's shoulder. The recoil, then the performance. It was like watching an actor get into character. He was about to leave, his heart heavy, when he saw the most telling moment of all. The final bell rang. The hallway erupted into the usual chaotic rush to escape. Lilith was at her locker, just a few down from the memorial. For a moment, as the crowd surged around her, she thought no one was looking. Her entire posture changed. The slouch straightened. The delicate, sorrowful mask vanished from her face, replaced by an expression of nothing. Blankness. Utter calm. She was just a girl putting books in a backpack. The performance was over for the day. Then, her eyes lifted and landed directly on him. She hadn't known he was there. He saw the surprise in her eyes, just for a flash. And then, the artist went back to work. Her shoulders slumped again. Her lower lip trembled, just a little. And she gave him a small, sad, heartbreakingly brave smile. A smile that said, "I'm trying to be strong." It was a challenge. A quiet, confident one. She knew he was watching, and she was showing him she could still play the part. Detective Carter didn't smile back. He just gave a slow, single nod. An acknowledgement. He walked out of that school into the afternoon light, the echo of slamming lockers fading behind him. The feeling in his gut wasn't a cold stone anymore. It was a key turning in a lock. He wasn't just investigating a tragic accident anymore. He was hunting a ghost. A ghost who was very much alive, and who was performing her greatest role right in front of everyone. The hallway was a stage. But an artist's true confessionals are never in their public performances. They're in their private sketches. The things they draw when they think no one is watching. Detective Carter knew this. The drawing Lilith had given him, the one with the guilty perspective, wasn't enough for a warrant. But a concerned parent, a father who'd seen a drastic change in his daughter's behavior, that was enough for a conversation. And Mr. Vance, wanting to clear his daughter's name, gave his full consent. He wanted the police to see the real Lilith. The talented, sensitive artist. So Carter found himself in the Vance gallery, the living room, with Lilith's large, black leather-bound portfolio on the coffee table between them. Lilith was upstairs, supposedly sleeping. Her father looked on, nervous, hopeful. "She's been pouring her grief into her art," he said, his voice tight. "It's her therapy." Carter nodded, his face a neutral mask. He opened the portfolio. The first few pages were exactly what you'd expect. Beautiful, technically perfect landscapes of Havens Point. The lighthouse, the docks, the spire in calm weather. They were peaceful. They were pleasant. But then he turned a page, and the air in the sterile room got a little colder. It was a portrait of Chloe, but not the laughing girl from the drawing she'd given him. This Chloe's face was blurred, as if seen through a rain-streaked window. Her eyes were just empty, dark smudges. "She's working through the trauma," her father murmured, trying to explain it away. Carter said nothing. He turned another page. Then another. The further he got into the sketchbook, the more the focus shifted. It was like watching a storm cloud gather on the horizon. The landscapes became darker, the skies heavy with charcoal swirls. The spire was featured again and again, but now it looked jagged, predatory. And then he found the first one that made his breath catch. It was a simple, quick sketch. 2 figures on a cliff. One was clearly Chloe, drawn with a few fluid lines. The other was a shadowy outline. And from the shadow's hands, lines of force extended, pushing Chloe into a scribbled, chaotic void. It could be dismissed. A nightmare. A manifestation of guilt. That's what her father whispered, his voice less sure now. Carter kept turning the pages. His movements were slow, deliberate. He felt like he was walking through a minefield. Then he found the one with the scratched-out eyes. It was another portrait of Chloe, more detailed. But her eyes, they weren't just closed. They'd been violently scratched over with a charcoal pencil, back and forth, until the paper was nearly torn through. The rest of the face was serene, beautiful. But the eyes were a raging, black hole. The room was utterly silent now, except for the sound of the paper. And then he found it. The piece de resistance. The confession that wasn't in words, but in lines and shadows. It was a comic strip. Just 2 panels. The first panel was drawn with careful, clean lines. It showed 2 stylized girls on a cliff. One girl, labeled with a subtle L, was pushing the other, labeled with a C. The push wasn't dynamic or angry. It was geometric, clinical, like a diagram. The second panel was different. The lines were heavier, darker, almost frantic. It showed only the first girl, the one with the L. She was standing alone, holding a single glowing light in her cupped hands. She was staring at it, not with joy, but with a kind of intense, possessive focus. The light was small. It looked lonely. And beneath these 2 panels, in Lilith's elegant, practiced handwriting, was a title. A Simple Trade. Carter stared at it. He could feel Mr. Vance's eyes on him, could feel the man's hope crumbling into dust right beside him. This wasn't grief. This wasn't trauma. This was a ledger. A balance sheet. The first panel, the cost. The push. The elimination of the rival light. The second panel, the profit. The possession of the only light that mattered. A simple trade. A life for a feeling of ownership. Carter slowly closed the portfolio. The sound was as final as a judge's gavel. He looked at Mr. Vance. The man's face was pale, his hands shaking. She's just a girl, he stammered, but the conviction was gone from his voice. He had seen it too. She's an artist, Carter replied, his voice low and steady. And she just explained her entire motive. He didn't need a confession spoken aloud. He had one drawn in charcoal. It was all there. The envy, the calculation, the cold, transactional view of human life. It was all right there in the sketchbook confessions. An interrogation room is a world of its own. It's a box designed to strip away pretense. The walls are a dull, neutral color, the kind that absorbs sound and hope in equal measure. There's a table, bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, and a mirror that everyone knows is a window. On one side of that table sat Detective Carter. On the other, Lilith Vance and a court-appointed child advocate, a woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Lilith was back in her performance costume. The fragile girl, swimming in a sweater that was too big for her. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. She was ready for the script she had prepared. The timeline, the weather, the slip. She was ready to play the part of the traumatized victim one more time. But Carter had no interest in her script. He was going to talk about art. He started gently. "Lilith, thank you for coming in. I wanted to talk to you about your drawings. The ones your father let us see." Her eyes flickered up to his. Wary. "They're just drawings." "See, that's where I disagree," Carter said, his voice conversational, almost friendly. He slid a photocopy of the 2-panel comic onto the table. "A simple trade. This one, for instance. It's not just a drawing. It's a statement." The advocate shifted. "Detective, is this necessary?" "I think it is," Carter said, his eyes never leaving Lilith's. "I'm trying to understand. The composition here. It's so deliberate. In the first panel, the lines are so clean. Almost architectural. This isn't a moment of passion, is it? It's a plan." Lilith said nothing, but a faint, almost imperceptible frown touched her lips. He was misreading her work. "And this second panel," Carter continued, tapping the image of the girl holding the lonely light. "The line work changes. It's heavier. Messier. Is that the emotion? The feeling of what? Satisfaction. Isolation." "You don't understand it," Lilith said, her voice quiet, but with a sharp edge of condescension. She couldn't help it. An artist criticized. "Then help me," Carter said, leaning back, giving her the stage. "Explain the title. A simple trade." What was the trade? She looked at him like he was a simpleton. "It's metaphorical. It's about outgrowing things. Leaving things behind that hold you back." "Holding you back from what?" Carter pressed, his voice still calm. "From purity," she said, latching onto the word she'd used at the Spire. "From a more perfect form." "A more perfect form of what?" "Friendship. Of everything," she said, and now her voice was gaining a little heat. This was her philosophy. Her manifesto. Most people just collect noise. Chaotic, messy, pointless relationships. Like collecting junk. A real artist seeks only the essential. The pure signal. Carter nodded slowly, as if she'd said something profoundly wise. He let the silence hang, letting her sit in her own superiority. Then, he slid the other drawing across the table. The one of Chloe with the violently scratched-out eyes. "And this?" he asked, his tone still one of genuine curiosity. "Is this part of removing the noise?" Lilith's composure tightened. She looked at the ruined eyes. For a moment, she seemed genuinely disturbed by the rawness of it. That was private. That was a moment of anger. Of grief. Anger at who? Carter asked softly. She didn't answer. "Was it anger at Chloe?" he ventured. "For being noisy? For having other friends? For that bracelet? What was her name?" "Jessica." Lilith's head snapped up. Her eyes, for the first time, showed a flash of genuine surprise. He knew about the bracelet. He knew about Jessica. The perfect, contained world of her story was cracking. "She was my friend," Lilith insisted, but the tremble in her voice was now one of frustration, not grief. "I believe you," Carter said, and he sounded like he meant it. "I think she was your most prized possession. And when a possession becomes flawed, when it gets a scratch, a true perfectionist can't stand to look at it anymore. They'd rather, he paused, letting the word hang in the sterile air, shatter it completely, than share it with the world. It wasn't like that. The words burst from her, louder than she intended. The advocate placed a cautioning hand on her arm. Then what was it like, Lilith? Carter's voice was still a low, relentless rumble. Help me understand the art. Because from where I'm sitting, this, he gestured to the drawings, all of this is just the blueprint. The plan for the real masterpiece. The one you created out at the SPIRE. The one you performed for the 911 operator. He had done it. He had reframed her entire crime not as a murder, but as her magnum opus. Her face went pale. The mask of the grieving girl was gone, replaced by the furious, exposed artist. You think you're so smart, she whispered, her voice venomous. You know nothing about art. Nothing about creating something perfect. The room went dead silent. The advocate's hand was frozen on Lilith's arm. Carter didn't move. He didn't even blink. Lilith stared at him, her chest heaving. She had taken the bait. In her arrogance, in her need to defend her artistic genius, she had all but confessed. She hadn't said, "I killed her." She had said something far more damning. She had called it perfect. Carter slowly reached over and clicked off the recorder. The tiny red light died. I think I understand now, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Thank you for the critique. He gathered his papers, leaving the drawings on the table. The evidence of her unmasking. He walked out, leaving Lilith sitting in the sudden, terrifying silence, surrounded by the ghosts of her own creations. The performance was over. All that was left was the truth. The interrogation room was a closed box. But a juvenile courtroom? That's a theater. And everyone has a part to play. The grieving parents, the stern judge, the impartial jury, and the defendant, the star of the show. Lilith Vance understood this better than anyone. She sat at the defense table, dwarfed by a suit that was just a little too formal, making her look even younger. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup. She was a canvas of carefully constructed innocence. This was her most important role yet, the child who made a mistake. Her defense attorney, a sharp woman named Ms. Glass, painted a picture for the court. A picture of a sensitive, gifted girl, trapped in a sterile home, using her art to process an unthinkable trauma. The drawings you will see are not blueprints, Ms. Glass told the jury, her voice resonating with conviction. They are the dark poetry of a grieving soul. They are nightmares given form. They are not a confession. They are a cry for help. And then, it was Lilith's turn. She took the stand, a small, solemn figure. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at the jury, her eyes wide and trusting. The prosecutor, a man with a weary demeanor, approached her carefully. Lilith, he began, the drawing called A Simple Trade. Can you explain what that was about? Lilith took a soft, shaky breath. A performance of someone searching for the right words. It was about feeling left behind, she said, her voice a fragile bell. Chloe was so bright. Everyone loved her. I was the quiet one. The drawing was about my fear that she would outgrow me, that I would be left alone in the dark. A single, perfect tear traced a path down her cheek. It was a stupid, selfish fear. But I was 13. Your feelings feel so big at that age. It was brilliant. She was taking the prosecution's sharpest weapon, her own art, and blunting it, turning it into evidence of her very normal, very human insecurity. She explained the scratched-out eyes as a moment of anger at the world for taking her. She explained the push in the comic as a metaphor for pushing people away before they can hurt you. She was a puppeteer, and the entire courtroom was her marionette. You could feel the jury softening. They saw a child. A confused, artistic child who'd been through hell. Even the judge, Justice Morrow, watched her with a neutral, but not unkind, expression. Her attorney led her to the climax of her performance. Lilith, Ms. Glass said, her voice gentle. Is there anything you'd like to say to Chloe's family? Lilith turned in her chair. She looked directly at Chloe's parents, her face a mask of pure, agonized remorse. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "I should have grabbed her hand. I should have been stronger. I should have been faster. I live with that every second." She let the sobs come, then, quiet and utterly devastating. I just want my friend back." It was a masterstroke. She wasn't denying the tragedy. She was taking a version of responsibility, the safe version, the version of the guilty bystander, not the architect. She was giving them a culprit they could understand, a moment of tragic inaction. For a long moment, the only sound in the courtroom was her crying. You could see the jury members looking down at their hands, moved. You could see Chloe's mother, her body trembling, a conflict of rage and pity on her face. Lilith, through her tears, saw it all. She saw the sway she held. She allowed herself a tiny inward flicker of triumph. She was winning. She was manipulating the very concept of grief and remorse, and it was working. She had taken the stand a suspect. She was stepping down a victim. The system was designed to protect children. And she was playing the part of a child so perfectly, so heartbreakingly, that it seemed impossible that the gears of justice would dare to crush her. She returned to her seat, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Her shoulders shook with the aftershocks of her performance. But if you were sitting close enough, like Detective Carter was, you might have seen it. As she sat down, as her attorney gave her a reassuring pat on the back, her crying stopped. Just for a second. Her breathing evened out. And her eyes, still glistening with manufactured tears, swept over the jury one last time. It wasn't a look of sadness. It was a look of appraisal. Of a puppeteer checking her strings. The curtain was about to fall on her performance. But she didn't know it yet. After the symphony of emotion Lilith conducted from the stand, the prosecution needed a change of tune. They needed to speak in a language that was cold, hard, and undeniable. They needed to show the jury the color of the monster that lived beneath the performance. And that color was envy. The prosecutor stood up. He didn't try to match Lilith's drama. His voice was flat, factual. A scalpel, not a sledgehammer. "The defense would have you believe this is a story about grief," he began. "But the evidence tells a different story. It tells a story of possession, of a jealousy so profound, so cold, that it could only express itself in one final, terrible act." He started with the journal. Not the art, but the words. He read aloud entries that had never been meant for public consumption. His voice takes on a flat, reading aloud tone. Observation: Chloe received a B on her science paper. She was disappointed for approximately 3 minutes before being distracted by a message on her phone. The resilience of the simple-minded is efficient. The word hung in the air. Simple-minded. He let the jury sit with it. Another entry. Jessica M. gave Chloe a handmade bracelet today. The craftsmanship was poor. The colors clashed. Chloe treated it as if it were a diamond. She doesn't understand value. She collects trinkets, while I seek masterpieces. He was building a profile. Not of a grieving friend, but of a clinical observer who viewed human connection as a transaction. Who saw affection as a currency that was being wasted. This wasn't a friendship, the prosecutor said, his voice dropping. This was a curator studying a specimen. And when the specimen failed to live up to her standards of exclusivity, when it dared to have value to others, the curator decided to remove it from the collection. Then, he introduced the physical evidence. The bracelet itself. It was placed in a clear evidence bag. A small, sad, tangled thing of green and blue threads. The defense calls this a token of friendship, the prosecutor said, holding the bag up. But for the defendant, it was a symbol of contamination. Of a light that was being shared. It wasn't found in her room as a cherished memento. It was tucked away in the back of a drawer, like a piece of evidence she couldn't bring herself to throw away. He paused, letting the image sink in. The perfect, lonely girl, and the cheap, colorful bracelet she secretly despised. But the most telling evidence of her state of mind, he continued, comes from her own art. Not from the dark, metaphorical comics, but from a series of sketches done in the weeks leading up to Chloe's death. He displayed a new drawing on the screen. It was a detailed study of the spire, but from a strange angle, with careful notes in the margins in Lilith's handwriting. "You see the notes here?" the prosecutor pointed. "Soil saturation potential. Primary root stability. Erosion gradient. This isn't the drawing of an artist captivated by nature's beauty. This is the diagram of an engineer. She was studying the structural integrity of the cliff edge. She was testing the stage before the performance." The courtroom was utterly silent. You could feel the mood shifting. The tears Lilith had so expertly summoned were drying up, replaced by a slow dawning chill. The prosecutor walked back to his table and picked up one final piece of paper. It was a printout of a soil analysis report. The defendant claimed she never went near the very edge of the spire that night. She claimed she was several feet back, on stable ground, when Chloe slipped. He looked at the jury. "But science doesn't care about performances. We tested the shoes she wore that night. Embedded deep in the treads, in a pattern that could only come from standing with full weight, we found a specific rare clay composite. A composite that geological surveys confirm exists in only one place on those bluffs, the exact crumbling lip of the spire where Chloe fell." He let the silence stretch. She wasn't feet away, trying to help. She was standing right there, on the most dangerous spot. After her friend had fallen. Was she looking down? Was she admiring her work? We can't know. But we do know beyond any doubt that her story is a lie. He turned and looked directly at Lilith. This was not an accident. It was a restoration. An attempt to restore order to a world she felt was becoming too noisy. She didn't want her friend back. She wanted her possession back. And when she couldn't have that, she decided no one would. The case against Lilith was strong. It was a tapestry woven with threads of motive, with her own arrogant words, with the dirty truth found on the soles of her shoes. But it was still, in the end, a tapestry. Something woven by human hands. Something a clever enough person could try to unravel, to call into question. What the prosecution needed now wasn't another thread. They needed a hammer. Detective Ben Carter walked back to the stand. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. He'd carried the weight of this truth for a long time. The prosecutor approached him. "Detective Carter, based on your investigation, did you believe the defendant's story that Chloe's death was a tragic accident?" "No, I did not," Carter said, his voice firm. "Why not?" "The evidence didn't support it. The soil on her shoes placed her at the exact edge. Her own journals and art revealed a mindset of possession and contempt, not friendship. And her performance of grief," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "lacked the chaos of genuine trauma. It was too clean." The defense attorney objected. "Speculation." "Sustained," the judge said. The prosecutor nodded. "Let's talk, then, about something that cannot speculate. Something that simply is." He turned to the screen at the front of the courtroom. "Detective, in the course of your investigation, did you explore all possible avenues to confirm the defendant's movements on the day of the murder?" "We did." "And did that include a review of public and private satellite imagery of the area?" A ripple went through the courtroom. "Satellite imagery?" "It did," Carter said. "We submitted requests to several satellite mapping companies. Most had no coverage for that specific time and place. It was a long shot. And was it a shot that paid off, Detective?" Carter looked directly at the jury. "Yes, it did." The prosecutor clicked a button on his laptop. The screen at the front of the courtroom, which had previously displayed Lilith's dark art, now glowed with something entirely different. A high-resolution, color satellite photograph. It was a bird's-eye view of the Vance property, the backyard, the line of trees, and the distinct, jagged peninsula of the spire. The image was so clear you could see the individual patio stones, the swing set, the fresh mud from the recent rains. In the bottom corner was a timestamp. 4:17 p.m. October 12th. The day of the murder. 1 hour before Chloe even arrived. "Detective," the prosecutor said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Can you please describe what we are looking at?" Carter pointed a laser pointer at the screen. A small red dot appeared. "This is the Vance property. This is the path to the Spire. And this," the dot moved to a small, but clearly human, figure in the backyard. A figure with long, dark hair, wearing a light gray hoodie. "Is the defendant Lilith Vance." The dot moved with the figure as it walked from the garage. The figure was carrying something. A long, heavy-looking object. "Can you enhance that section?" the prosecutor asked. The image zoomed in. The pixels rearranged themselves, sharpening. The object in the figure's hands became clear. It was a heavy, iron-headed digging bar, the same one her father had confirmed was stored in their garage. The red followed Lilith's tiny, digital avatar as she walked calmly, purposefully, down the path toward the Spire. She wasn't running. She wasn't frantic. She was on a mission. The dot stopped at the very base of the Spire, right where the unstable ground began. The figure bent over, placing the heavy tool carefully on the ground, partially obscured by a clump of grass. Then, the figure turned and walked back toward the house. The red dot vanished. The image froze. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the projector. The prosecutor let the image burn into everyone's retina for a long, long moment. He didn't need to be dramatic. The truth on the screen was more dramatic than any words could ever be. "So, to be perfectly clear, detective," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "This satellite image, time-stamped 1 hour before Chloe Henderson even arrived at the property, shows the defendant moving the very tool that would later be found at the scene of the accident?" The tool she claimed must have been accidentally left there days before. "Yes," Carter said. "It does. It shows her planting it there. Yes. It shows premeditation." Detective Carter finally turned his head and looked directly at Lilith. Her face was a ghastly white. Her mask of calm innocence had vaporized. She was staring at the screen, at the ghost of herself from that afternoon, caught in the act by an eye in the sky. "Yes," Carter said, his voice final. "It shows the first deliberate move of the game. It shows her setting the stage. That was the hammer. The final stroke. It wasn't an interpretation of her art. It wasn't an analysis of soil. It was a photograph. A moment in time, captured from 100 miles in the sky. It was the perfect, unforgivable witness. Lilith's entire defense, her entire performance, crumbled to dust in that moment. There was no metaphor to hide behind. No tears that could wash away that timestamp. The truth was no longer a tapestry. It was a photograph. When every other mask shatters, when the art and the intellect and the cool superiority fail, there is one last costume left in the box. The oldest one in the world. The costume of the helpless child. And Lilith Vance put it on. It started with a gasp. A sharp, ragged intake of air that cut through the stunned silence left by the satellite image. All eyes swung to her. Her lawyer was whispering frantically in her ear, but Lilith wasn't listening. She was staring at the blank screen as if it were a ghost. Then, the dam broke. A sob wrenched out of her, not the delicate pretty tears from before, but a raw, guttural sound of pure panic. She shoved her chair back, the legs screeching against the floor. "No. No, please." Her voice was a high, desperate wail. The sound a trapped animal makes. She wasn't articulating philosophy anymore. She wasn't crafting metaphors. She was begging. "I didn't mean it. It was an accident. A real accident." She collapsed forward, onto the defense table, her body convulsing with sobs. Her shoulders shook uncontrollably. She was no longer a poised artist or a cunning strategist. She was a little girl, terrified and alone in a room full of adults. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please. You have to believe me." She turned her streaming, contorted face toward the judge, her words dissolving into incoherent, snotty pleas. This was the performance to end all performances. She was throwing every last ounce of her being into it, weaponizing her youth, her tears, her sheer, pathetic vulnerability. I'm just a kid. I'm just a stupid kid. I don't know what I was doing. She slammed her small fist on the table, not in anger, but in a frantic, helpless rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Don't send me away, please. I'll do anything. It was a mistake. It was a mistake. She looked at the jury, her eyes wide with a manufactured primal fear. She was trying to summon their most basic instinct, to protect a child. She was betting everything that the sight of a 13-year-old girl falling apart would be more powerful than any satellite photo, any soil analysis, any drawing. And for a moment, it almost was. The raw, ugly noise of her breakdown was horrifying. You could see the discomfort on the jurors' faces. The human urge to comfort a crying child is a powerful, deep-seated thing. But then, you had to remember. You had to remember the clinical push in the comic. The notes on soil saturation. The careful placement of the tool. The arrogant journal entries. This wasn't a child having a tantrum. This was the final, frantic act of a cornered animal who had run out of clever tricks. The puppeteer had cut her own strings and was now just thrashing on the floor. The sobs eventually subsided into ragged, hiccuping breaths. The energy drained out of her, leaving her slumped and spent over the table. The courtroom was left in a ringing silence, heavy with the echoes of her desperation. The mask of the beggar was now lying on the floor, shattered alongside all the others. And all that was left underneath was the terrifying, empty truth. There is a moment, after the storm of emotion, when the air itself seems to harden. The begging was over. The performance was done. All that was left in the courtroom was the weight of the truth, heavy and still as stone. Judge Justice Morrow adjusted his glasses. He looked not at the weeping girl, not at the lawyers, but at the law itself. His face was a landscape of grim resolve. He began to speak, and his voice wasn't loud. It was precise. Each word was a carefully laid brick, building a wall between Lilith and the world she thought she could manipulate. Lilith Vance, he began. This court has listened to your testimony. It has reviewed your art. It has seen the evidence of a mind that is, by any measure, brilliant. A mind capable of planning, of foresight, of intricate design. He paused, letting the compliment hang in the air, its sharp edges catching the light. But with that brilliance comes a profound responsibility. A responsibility you not only shirked, you weaponized. You did not just break the law. You attempted to contort it. You used your youth as a shield, your tears as a weapon, and your art as both a blueprint and a smokescreen. He leaned forward, his eyes now fixed on her. Lilith had gone still, her tear-streaked face tilted up, listening. The sobbing had stopped. This was a language she understood, cold, analytical, and final. You spoke of purity, of removing noise. You saw a human life as a flaw in your perfect world and sought to correct it. You then crafted an elaborate performance of grief, not out of remorse, but as the final, arrogant stroke of your masterpiece. You believed you were the author, the director, and the star. You believed the rest of us were merely your audience. He picked up the satellite photo, holding it for a moment before setting it down with a soft, definitive tap. This image proves, beyond any doubt, that you are not a child who made a tragic mistake. You are a calculated individual who committed a premeditated act. You stopped being just a kid the moment you decided to play God with someone else's life. Lilith's breath hitched. It was the sound of the last door slamming shut. The court sees no genuine remorse here, the judge continued, his voice dropping, becoming almost sorrowful. Only a performance that has run its course. You have shown contempt for the law, for truth, and for the very concept of human connection. He took a final breath. Therefore, on the charge of murder in the second degree, this court finds you guilty. The word landed not with a bang, but with a terrible, final quiet. It was an absolution of nothing. It was the one variable her brilliant, narcissistic mind had never truly accounted for, a consequence she could not talk, draw, or cry her way out of. There was no dramatic scream. No collapse. Lilith simply folded. The arrogance, the intellect, the calculated poise, it all drained from her body, leaving behind a hollow, 13-year-old shell. The monster was gone. All that was left was a child, finally understanding the weight of the cage she had built for herself. The gavel fell. After the noise of the courtroom, the silence is what stays with you. In Haven's Point, the spire is now fenced off with chain link and warning signs. The wind still whistles through the gaps, but it doesn't carry laughter anymore. It just sounds lonely. The wildflowers still cling to the crumbling soil, a splash of color against the gray, doing what life does, persisting even in the places where it shouldn't. Lilith's artwork was boxed up and put into storage. Her sterile, white room remains exactly as she left it, a perfect, empty gallery. There are no new drawings. The canvas of her life has been filled, and the final picture is one of utter ruin. And in a juvenile detention facility, in a quiet room with beige walls, a therapist places a piece of paper and a charcoal pencil on a table. "Draw what you feel, Lilith," she says, her voice gentle. Lilith looks at the pencil. The same instrument she once wielded with such confidence, such cold, precise artistry. She used to look at a blank page and see a world of possibilities, a space she could control completely. Now, she just sees the blankness. Her hand doesn't tremble with emotion. It trembles with the absence of it. The arrogance that fueled her, the intellectual superiority that she mistook for a soul, it's gone. The performance is over, and there is no one left to perform for. She reaches for the pencil. Her fingers, once so sure, feel clumsy. She touches the charcoal tip to the pristine white paper. And she stops. The page remains empty. The artist, who saw human connection as a transaction and a human life as a flaw in her design, has finally run out of things to say. The masterpiece she spent her life creating was her own monstrous ego. And now that it has collapsed, there is nothing left behind but the silence. No more lies. No more masks. Just a girl, a blank page, and the terrifying, endless quiet.